Thank you, Lou. And thank you, CERBA, for inviting me yet again. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Mongolia, as Lou said, will not be covered, unfortunately, in this presentation. However, we actually just published an update today on Mongolia. So as Gilles mentioned earlier today, we're trying to be a little bit more green. We didn't print copies of this presentation. However, it will be available through the CERBA website, or likewise, feel free to come up to me during the break or after the event. I'm happy to share it, as well as samples of some of our other country coverage. So no need to photograph the deck. I'm also going to go through fairly quickly. As Gilles mentioned earlier, we're under tight time constraints. So I'm going to try and cover Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan as quickly as possible. I am going to cut into my time, though, and just say something very briefly about CERBA. My firm, Macro Advisory, we work with many trade associations. Some are regionally focused, industry focused. But what really, I think, differentiates CERBA is that they look at Greater Eurasia. And much like my firm, we look at all of Greater Eurasia. And I think that's really one of their greatest selling points. CERBA's been a pleasure to work with for many years. And again, thank you. It's an honor to be here today. Before I get started, forgive me, I'm going to do a quick plug on my firm. Just very quickly, who we are. Macro Advisory is the leading Eurasia-focused and Eurasia-based consultancy and advisory firm. And when I say Eurasia-based, I'm the outlier. I'm based in North America. My co-founder and partner, Chris Wiefer, is based in Moscow. All of our consultants, all of our analysts are based in the region. They're based in Moscow, they're based in Nur-Sultan, they're based in Tashkent, they're based in Ulaanbaatar, they're based in Kiev, throughout the region. We feel very passionately you cannot do what we do properly by remote. Again, I think that's a big differentiating factor about us. And when we talk about Greater Eurasia, we're really talking about all of the CIS, plus Mongolia, Afghanistan, and Iran. So I'm going to jump into the macro and political outlook, starting with Russia. So, where are we right now? President Putin needs public support for his plans to reform government and governance in Russia. Thus, we expect a much greater focus moving forward on the economy. This is leading to a much greater sense of urgency to try and accelerate the pace of the national projects. Income growth and national projects progress are clear priorities for this year and for next. In line with this, we do expect the Bering-Vostok case to be ended well ahead of preparations for SPIEF in June. And one note on SPIEF, there's been a lot of talk, particularly today, about rumors, particularly bouncing around Telegram and other channels, that SPIEF may be canceled or postponed. We have confirmation from senior people in the presidential administration that there are no plans to cancel or postpone at this time due to coronavirus or any other reason. That SPIEF, the show, is scheduled to go on as planned. As I mentioned, we expect President Putin to be much more hands-on regarding the economy as his focus shifts to accelerating the national projects and increasing personal income in Russia. We'll see more resources dedicated to creating the catalyst for more effective growth and accelerating economic recovery. This also means that the Kremlin needs to improve the business climate and to attract more inward investment despite the sanctions overhang and legacy skepticism. Thus, the objective currently is to show progress from next year and to avoid any new controversies such as Bering-Vostok. Other priorities include no retaliation from new sanctions, progress in removing Soviet-era legislation, and effective regulatory guillotine. A key point here is that income growth is the top priority for the Kremlin, as it sees incomes directly correlated to public support. The budget adjustment from last September was focused on boosting salaries, pensions, and other social areas. President Putin has also made no secret of his frustration with the slow pace of national projects implementation. His desire to see more progress at a faster pace was the main reason for senior government changes that were announced recently. More changes amongst the deputy ministers and at senior official level can be expected as they come under increased pressure to deliver results. So On the back of a more aggressive approach to the national projects, we anticipate increased spending, and with it have raised our GDP and retail sales forecasts. We've also reduced our oil price forecast, and with that have reduced the expected budget surplus. I'm now going to talk about the 850-pound gorilla sitting in the corner that nobody wants to talk about, but it's there, and that's sanctions. The sanctions risk in the U.S., and bear in mind, I spend most of my time in Washington paying for my sins. The sanctions risk in the U.S. has been elevated as the partisan fight continues on the back of the failed impeachment process in the U.S. It's a question of what will be the catalyst for the action. It could be Venezuela, it could be allegations of election interference. These are two possible sparks. Yes, this is a domestic U.S. political issue, but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the end results are likely to be more sanction activity. The other thing that is very important for people to understand, a lot of our clients, particularly in Europe and outside the US, have consistently been complacent, assuming that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell will continue to effectively block more onerous sanctions legislation as in the past. We don't expect this to happen. The clear message from his office and his people is that he is no longer going to step in front of the moving train. McConnell is up against a very compelling candidate, Amy McGrath. She's a retired Marine Corps colonel. She was the first woman to fly combat missions in an F/A-18, and a candidate that resonates and is found very compelling even in his real true home base in Kentucky, on both sides of the aisle. So the message from McConnell is he's not going to do any more blocking. In terms of domestic politics in Russia, I'm not going to really spend too much time on the composition of the new government, other than to say we expect more changes in the very near term amongst the deputy ministers, mostly to shake up the national projects and keep things moving. So, in terms of monetary policy, regarding the ruble, the central bank remains committed to the ruble-US dollar rate of 65 and will remain so for the next 3 years, as they see it as a key factor in helping improve Russia's competitiveness and boosting its export potential. So with that, I'm going to move on to Kazakhstan. President Tokayev remains firmly committed to the Nurly-Zhol national program of economic and industrial reforms. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. He also announced a radical change to the budget program with a planned raised spending deficit and higher borrowings as part of a plan to fund the modernization program. The government will be making a concerted push for increased localization. This is an effort to cut imports and boost investment into local manufacturing. Political concerns have definitely eased in Kazakhstan as President Tokayev appears to be working very constructively with Nazarbayev's inner circle. On the economic side, we expect growth in 2020 to stay close to 4% unless we see the oil price average much lower than expected. Again, keep in mind that 70% of Kazakhstan's exports are hydrocarbons. So Nurly-Zhol, I mentioned I'd come back to this. It's Russia's equivalent to, it is Kazakhstan's equivalent to Russia's national projects. It's the modernization and economic stimulus plan with the aims of diversifying the economy, increasing non-oil exports to 50%, raising contribution of SMEs to the economy by 50%, increasing long-term economic growth and reducing volatility, improving the well-being of the people, and lastly, but importantly, maintaining social stability. This is really Nazarbayev's legacy program, and it has the goal of reducing Kazakhstan's reliance on hydrocarbons as well as the state companies. So, skipping ahead to the surveys, the Vice Minister touched on this earlier. Kazakhstan's ranking continues to improve in many of the global business rankings. Continues to improve its position in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business survey, as well as showing significant improvement in terms of legal categories and transparency. It's now rated #2 in the CIS Eurasia region, only behind Georgia. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up with Uzbekistan. President Mirziyoyev continues to shake up the government. He's recently made a series of cabinet changes to help stimulate efficiency and increase transparency. Uzbekistan has improved its position in the recent Transparency International ranking of 180 states, and a new Eurobond issue of US $1 billion is expected this year. Uzbekistan saw its economy expand by 5.5% in 2019. And the economy strengthened and diversified as FDI more than tripled, coming in at $4.2 billion. The trade deficit widened last year, which we see as a temporary move, as most of the goods imported were in categories aimed at creating new industrial sectors. Uzbekistan's #1 export item, by the way, should be of interest to most of the people in this room, was gold at $5.1 billion US last year. Lastly, S&P affirmed its sovereign rating of BB- with a stable outlook, citing strong growth and reform progress as positives. On monetary policy, we expect the steep devaluation of the som. We believe that's over, following its loss of almost 12% versus the US dollar last year. The som is now very competitive, and as many of the reforms are in place, should be much more stable going forward. In terms of reforms, we've seen the pace of reforms continue. Changes in taxation are now working, and the continued easing of the visa registration requirements have been announced. Finally, on Eurasian Economic Union, just to wrap things up with this, it's clear that while there will be no quick entry for Uzbekistan, a trade deal remains a real possibility. The ambassador talked about the Eurasian Economic Union earlier, but we're going to see continued cooperation on a regional basis, a very high priority in Uzbekistan. So again, I want to thank you all for your time. Forgive me if I ran through a lot of material very quickly, but as I said, this deck is available, and if you have any questions or if you'd like to receive any of our country reports, feel free to see me later. Thank you very much for your time, and again, CERBA, thank you for your invitation.
I'm not going to let him off that easily. I would like, I know he tried to respect our chairman's admonition to move things along, but I have a couple of questions.
We can share.
Does it work now? Yes, it works now. If you could find the slides, I'd be very interested in a very quick comparison of rates of GDP growth and the headline macroeconomic statistics, just so that we can contrast what stage each of the countries is at. There we go. So, and that's the first question. While you're finding those slides, I did want to ask, because I know you have a broad range of clients working in the region, and obviously not asking you to divulge any economically sensitive information, but what is the mood amongst investors in the various sectors that you cover? So you can take it in either order.
Yeah, I'll touch on your second question first. It's a very good question, and I'd say this is important, particularly in North America, where, starting with Russia, I would say we've seen from Russia very much a binary approach to business in North America. While the relationship between the Russian government and the Canadian government and the US government is clearly at one of the more strained places we've seen in a long time, at the same time, the relationship when it comes to business is completely different. My partner, Chris Weaver, who many of you know, he always uses the expression, why let bad politics get in the way of good business? And likewise, our clients, particularly in North America, the Canadian companies and US companies, these are, most of our clients are major multinationals. Those that are engaged in business in the region, actually, the challenge that they're dealing with isn't so much making money. The challenge they're dealing with are, more often than not, the optics of wanting to expose themselves, particularly in the case of Russia, but also some of the other markets in the Eurasia region, because obviously the level of understanding, whether you're talking about boardrooms in Toronto or New York or London, wherever, the misconceptions and the perceptions of how business is done in this part of the world are very disconnected from the reality. I would say most of our clients that are engaged in business across all sectors in Russia are actually doing quite well. Our clients who are engaged in business in Kazakhstan are also doing quite well. It's an increasingly transparent environment, and one in which the environment is become much more predictable and transparency. Uzbekistan's at a very early stage. I would say in Uzbekistan there's a lot of enthusiasm. We have a very significant market, 32 million people, with huge pent-up demand. We're still at early stages. I would say that there's some frustration, but at the end of the day, as everybody in this room knows, when you're dealing with any new markets, it's never a linear process.
Thanks, JP. Now, the slide we're looking at is for Russia?
This is Russia.
Yeah.
So
you have comparable slides for the other two countries?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll move forward to Kazakhstan. Let's see.
It's a very dense slide.
Well, I can't see it, and I'm closer than you.
Okay.
But most of you are younger than me, so you can see better anyway. Let me just see back here. I think we may touch on it. Oh.
That was it there? No?
Yeah. So
it's still small.
It's still pretty
sorry,
small.
I posed that question. So if you don't have one for Uzbekistan, we can ask the next speaker to come up.
Yeah. Take a look at Uzbekistan. Oops. Again, it's a little bit clearer, but
those are remarkable year-on-year growth rates from a very low base.
Absolutely. I mean, we're looking for this year, our estimate is 5.8% for GDP growth and 6% the next 2 years. So, and
Canadian politicians would be very jealous. Anyway, thank you very much, JP.
Thank you.
Sorry for the question. And please stay on.